Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night, depending on where you are and when you are. Sorry, I've got a cat that's trying to get in. 1 second, I'll be right back. I'm back. Sorry, my cat was scratching at my door, and he was just needing some attention, so I gave it to him. He's already had some food, so I thought that would be enough, but no, he wanted to say hello. So, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, everybody, depending on where you are and when you are listening to this. So, today we're going to be discussing Britain and maybe even Europe and maybe even the world's most prolific serial killer. And that's a man by the name of Harold Frederick Shipman Jr., or Dr. Harold Shipman, as most people know him, or Dr. Death, as many know him as well. And we're going to get into the background of Harold Shipman, his life, his crimes, his mind, and what motivated him to commit murder, and ask the question: was Harold Shipman addicted to murder? Join us as we try to discover the truth behind that. So, hi, Diva Girl. Glad you could join us, and hello to everybody joining us. And just say hello in the chat and leave a like, because probably some of the language I'm going to be using about Shipman, to do with like the specifics of his case, probably going to get me bogged down in the algorithm as per usual. We may be making a switch to Rumble from this channel soon. I will still post on YouTube, but I think most of the stuff I'm going to be posting will be on Rumble, because it's a free speech platform and it doesn't penalize you or punish you for using words like murder or drug abuse or whatever. It's a much better platform for being able to do true crime, I feel. And I think more true crime creators will be moving over there, because I think it's kind of I think it's insulting to use these, ridiculous words like self-deletion and all that type of thing. I think it's insulting to the victims of that type of stuff, and or deletion instead of murder. I think it's ridiculous. We're adults. It's a big bad world out there sometimes, and to, I guess, try and sweep it under the rug and pretend it doesn't exist doesn't do anybody any favors. So it's important that we raise awareness of cases like this, and true crime in general, true crime cases in general, so that we can try to prevent them and identify people who may fit the bill, so to speak. And we'll get into it. We're going to start with Harold Shipman's childhood. As all serial killers, their childhood is what molds them. It's what molds us all, serial killer or not. You can have a very good childhood that's very healthy, or you could have a very not good childhood that is very not healthy. But either it doesn't necessarily make one a serial killer. Shipman's childhood was complex and difficult, but there were many killers who had a perfect childhood, who had, a great childhood, who had the perfect amount of socialization, great parents, no abuse or anything like that in the house. But they still go on to kill, like Ted Bundy. But there are others who had horrific childhoods and go on to kill. So I don't necessarily believe that childhood is the be all and end all for what makes a killer, but I certainly think childhood is what molds people's personalities, certainly. And I think certain negative traits, personality flaws, chemical imbalances in killers are rooted in their childhood, and that's the case for all of them. So they don't necessarily have to have a traumatic childhood to have a chemical imbalance. This can be genetic. Sometimes it's as a result of trauma. Sometimes it's just genetic. That is the intricacies of brain chemistry and how complicated and complex it is. But I digress. Straight into Harold Shipman's childhood. He was born the 14th of January, 1946, so just after the war. He was a part of the baby boomers. To Vera Nee Britton, that was her surname before marriage, and to Harold Frederick Shipman Sr. So he was named after his father. He grew up in Nottingham's Bestwood social housing development, or council estate as it's referred to in Britain. So he grew up in social housing. His family was devoutly Methodist and ultra conservative, which is somewhat bizarre for their working class background. Of course, being fervently religious was fairly typical of the working class in Britain in those days, but to be ultra conservative wasn't, especially in the Midlands. Were working class people by and large voted for left wing parties like the Labour Party, or in some cases even further left wing parties like the Communist Party, who were pretty strong around the mid 40s, early 50s in Britain after the war. And so yeah, his family was different in the sense that they were conservative in a overwhelmingly working class area, and that's the difference in Britain. Traditionally, it's changed now, but the working class are generally very left wing voting. But that has changed in the last 2 decades or so, where the working class in Britain has shifted overwhelmingly to the right, and there's a variety of reasons for that. But that's for another episode. That's for a different discussion. But Harold was the second of three children, and Vera would forbid Fred, or which is what he would be called, and I will occasionally refer to him as Fred because that was his middle name, and they would call him Fred, and he was often called Fred to distinguish himself from his father, who was also called Harold Frederick Shipman. They didn't really call him Junior. That's not really wasn't really a dumb thing in Britain. It was to name your son after you. That's certainly a very much a dumb thing and was at the time, but not to refer to him as Junior or as Pop as Senior. It's very much an American thing. Whereas in Britain, a lot of the time, the junior will be referred to as his middle name first, and people of that generation were bizarrely referred to by their middle names quite often. Even my own grandfather, who is still living, my last surviving grandparents, his middle name is Philip, and his first name is John, but nobody ever calls him John. Everybody calls him Philip. So it's kind of a generational thing. So if you hear me calling him Fred, that's why. I'm not talking about somebody else. Um, and Vera would often forbid Fred or Harold from associating with other kids in his area, other working class kids. She feared that they would be corruptive influences and would drag him down. And she had big ambitions that Harold would be a social climber and would move up the social classes in Britain from uh, working class and social housing to like comfortably middle class, which is what he did. At this time in childhood, Vera instilled a superiority complex in Harold as a result of as a result of her encouraging distance between him and the other children in the area. And she always instilled the sense or the belief in Harold that he was superior and better than all of them. And she even gave him this sense that he was her favorite child, and this certainly made a lasting effect on him. He passed his 11 plus exams at aged 11, which back in the day, they don't do this anymore in Britain. But back in the day, they used to have a thing called the 11 plus exams. So when you were finishing primary school, which is the British equivalent of elementary school, you'd be taking exams, which would determine where you would go in high school if you did really well, even if you were poor, like Harold was from a working class background. You could get like a scholarship to go to a private school, and if you were really smart, and that's what he did. He passed his 11 plus with flying colours, which Vera was very proud of, and he gained like a scholarship and free entry into Nottingham's top private school, High Pavement. And whilst there, Shipman was a cross country runner and rugby union player. Vera forced Harold to take his own sister to the high school dances, which greatly embarrassed Harold Shipman, as you could imagine, and not and as you would assume, his classmates actually didn't uh, bully him over this. In fact, they remarked that, and he remarked that it seemed like they felt bad for him, and they did. He was never bullied at school. All of his classmates respected him and felt really bad for him that his mother was making him, take his own sister to a dance, and she wouldn't let him dance with another girl, and showed what a controlling and domineering figure in his life Vera was up until her death, and his. He was well liked by his classmates, but he was a very reserved person. He didn't get too close with anyone, and he was considered mature for his age, and he wouldn't engage in what he would see as kind of childish antics. So he would always seem like he was a bit above it all, a bit above all the rough housing and the jokes, the practical jokes and things like that high school kids do. He kind of felt above that, and this would lead to his classmates like affectionately referring to him as granddad. He was like the granddad of the group. He would only drop this withdrawn nature when he was on the rugby field, where he would become loud, domineering, and fearless. He was like the captain of the team. He was the main guy. He was the guy making the big hits, the big tackles, telling everybody what to do, basically ordering everybody around. And this is where he really came out of his shell, seemingly, and this gained him immense respect from his schoolmates and from from teachers and his parents. And he was also a cross country runner as well, and this meant he was in good shape. And then on in June 1963, at the age of 17, the turning point in Fred's life, or Harold's life, was the death of his mother Vera, and she'd been suffering for a while with lung cancer, and Shipman witnessed her die at home in bed, and Shipman would witness before this the doctor coming over and administering morphine to ease his mother's pain, and this would later become Shipman's MO for his murders. And Shipman, once he saw his mother had died, he ran for miles in the rain and didn't stop. He ran to basically the next town over, to I think Mansfield, and he experienced a deep endorphin rush and high. And this is like the first signs of Shipman's addictive personality, and his poor coping strategy. Well, I guess it was kind of the start of a chemical imbalance because, you know, his mother died. That's such a bad thing. And to kind of run away from it, literally, he went on a really large run and then he got this high, this buzz, the runner's high, this really strong sense of euphoria. And also, if you think about it, he'd been probably suffering and his mother was suffering for months before with the lung cancer, with the pain, and he was suffering, wondering when she was going to die. And I think maybe it was a great relief when she died, and he got that high, and it was a relief, and he associated the good feeling chemically with that relief, and then from that moment there was a real chemical imbalance in his head. He associated death with a positive chemical high, which it wasn't a high from his mother's death. It was that a natural running high that any normal person would be able to rationalize as that. You know, you'd be able to go, right, my mother's died, I'm running from it. This is awful, but at least I've got this good feeling and it's helping me cope. You know, I think most people from that would probably turn to a life of addiction, which we'll later find out he did, but not addiction to murder like he later became. You know, uh, hi, Val. So glad you could join us. I know you have your doctor's appointment. Uh, I don't. I'm not gonna crack any jokes based on the subject of this live. But yeah, I hope your doctor's better than Dr. Harold Shipman. But yeah, Harold Shipman was targeting old ladies. So yeah, you wouldn't have been in his category because you're very young. But hi, so glad you could make it, and glad Teddy, Archibald, Nala, and Daffy got their treats. Oh, you, they certainly did. And earlier, before you showed up, I had to mute at the start because Teddy was scratching at my door because he wanted to be part of the live, and I had to just say, look, this is kind of important, and you know, there's some subjects that I don't want my cat to hear. I do see him like a son, you know what I mean? And I know it sounds kind of outlandish to some people, but I don't really care. Judge me if you will. But yeah, I look at him like a child, so you wouldn't want your child to be hearing that kind of thing. So yeah, keep him away. But yeah, glad you appreciated the funny side of it. Yeah, glad you're still here, Diva girl. So yeah, we're just going over Harold Shipman's background, his childhood, and I agree this is not appropriate for Teddy. It's not appropriate for Shiloh or Bowie or Henry Jr. either. Can't wait to see pictures of Henry Jr. I really want to see pictures of Henry Jr. Um, and yeah, uh, uh, like after his mother died, he ran for miles, got this real strong buzz from it. And the next day at the bus stop, going to school, waiting for the bus to go to school, a school friend of his was asking him what he did over the weekend, and he just said in like really like blunt, cold, unemotional tone, "Oh, my mum died." And his friend was like, "Oh my god, are you okay?" Like giving him like sympathy, and uh, he was like, "Oh, I'm all right. I went for a run. I'm fine now." So yeah, his friend who was interviewed for a book that I read about Harold Shipman said at that moment he just didn't understand that. He just felt really sick in his stomach the way he reacted to that, like it was just something he'd compartmentalized completely. It didn't seem human to him, you know, at all. Because, you know, if your mother died, you know, and especially when you're 17, like he was, you know, hormones and everything, uh, you'd expect you to be a total wreck. But he was just cold as ice. I'll send you some. I have a catnip plant outside now, and they are loving it. Oh, that's great! I can't wait. Honestly, it's such a nice story hearing he had a son, a baby. Yeah, because my new cat Archibald is the product of the local neighbourhood tomcat, who was going around impregnating all the female cats who hadn't been spayed or neutered. And obviously Nala is my cat. My female cat is an indoor cat, so we keep her inside. But yeah, it's nice to add a bit of balance, levity, and personality and talk of cats whilst we're live, because you know it's 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 nice to balance out all the murder and the the horrible stuff that we talk about here sometimes with something a bit more light-hearted and funny, because I'm all about balance and we need balance in this world. And yeah, just like Henry. Yeah, he really is. He really is. He's. It's interesting because Archibald is an all black cat, but the tomcat who wanders around my neighborhood is a ginger cat, and my Archibald's mother's all black, so it's weird. He's got like all black coat, but he's got kind of like the patterns that a ginger cat would have. It's so unique, his coat. But yeah, I digress. Murder and Tobins. Oh, that's such a great name for a podcast where we talk true crime and cats. Sometimes people get like annoyed or mad when people use humor when talking about true crime, but I feel like we need it with these heavy subjects. Oh, I completely agree. It's like doctors, medical workers, police, people who have, and soldiers as well, people who have professions that are pretty grim. Uh, they often use humor to just be able to cope with it, and I think it's much better, using humor than turn into like a substance or anything like that. So like I completely agree. As long as you're not like mocking the victims, which is something we don't do here. We're really respectful of the victims, and all the channels I go to, like when you were doing your lives, Val, you were always very respectful to the victims. I could feel every case that you covered, you had a deep personal affinity with the victims, especially the Amy Hardwick case, which I would love to go over and maybe have you up to discuss sometime, because it's in keeping with my theme of discussing DV and cases related to that, and issues regarding that. I know it's something very important to you, and it is very important to me too. Oh, glad you agree. So yeah, and on September, and then he finished sixth form, which is basically like the age, which is what you do voluntarily after you finish high school in the UK at 16. So when his mother died, he was already in sixth form, which is kind of like finishing school type of thing, where you from 16 to 18, you do this before university. We generally call that college, and then university. Just for you Americans and Canadians who are here, and wherever else anyone's from. And he finished that, and then he began studying medicine at Leeds University in September 1965. And on the 5th of November 1966, he married Primrose May Oxtoby while still a student at university. This was due to Primrose becoming pregnant. They met on the bus, and apparently Primrose had to make the first move because, knowing Fred, he wasn't off the rugby field. He wasn't the most socially strong person and able to lead a conversation. And given the fact that his mother used to make him take his sister to the school dances, he didn't really develop much abilities with the ladies. So Primrose saw him. She was 17 at the time, so a few years younger than Harold. And she saw him and just came and sat next to him and put her hand on his knee and started talking to him. Very forward lady, knew what she wanted, which was very unusual for the time. Women weren't generally expected to make the first move back in the 60s, but in situations like this, Primrose made the move and she got her man. and they only married so soon because she'd become pregnant. And Primrose and Harold Shipman both came from very devout Methodist families. So any sign that they'd been, having sex outside of marriage would have really destroyed their families and their families' view of them. Very devout religious families. And Fred Senior, or Harold Shipman Senior, Harold Shipman's dad, did not attend the wedding. Neither did Primrose's parents, because they knew that Primrose had fallen pregnant early and that they had had sex outside of marriage, and that was why. So the Shipman's wedding was at a registry office where only Harold was there, along with Primrose, obviously, and and Harold's two siblings, and some work friends. That was about it. And his father said to him at this time, "If your mother was alive, she'd be so ashamed about him having sex outside of marriage," because his mother was everything to him, and she was devoutly religious. And I think, and Fred, or Harold, but Fred is his middle name, Harold would, which he would often go by. Harold would say that was possibly the worst moment in his life, when he heard his father say those words, and it really destroyed him. He said a part of him died that day when he heard those words from his dad. Really, really heartbroken. And he graduated Leeds University with a medical degree in 1970, after failing in his final exams the year previous, which would probably be down to all the pressure of Primrose being pregnant, and his family not wanting anything to do with him anymore, and his father and Primrose's family not approving of him either. So all that stress probably crap, because he was very, very bright intellectually. And it is true that although his mother, Vera, always had a desire for Harold to be a social climber, to move up in class, he only decided to turn to medicine at 17, when she died. But before that, he didn't really know what he wanted to do. He just knew he wanted to be somebody, and that was that. He graduated, yeah, and began his career as a junior houseman at Pontefract General Infirmary in West Yorkshire. And Pontefract is a town not too far away from Castleford. It's pretty quiet. Not a lot happens around there. It's a very industrial, working class town. Northern England, and Shipman came from the Midlands, so not that different culturally. And he settled down there, and this is where he committed his first murder, it's believed. And the instance, it is interesting and devastating, because it doesn't fit his later MO of the crimes he was convicted for. He was only convicted of 15 murders. However, based on investigations and inquiries after the fact, after him being uncovered for murdering those 15 women in the 90s, it showed records and patterns in his time at other surgeries that would suggest, a disproportionate number of patients dying, that would suggest he had killed. And with hindsight being a 2020 thing, when he was convicted, people would rethink things that in the past they may have dismissed. For example, a mother, whilst he was at Pontefract General Infirmary, left her young 50 or 50. He was convicted of 15. Sorry, Val, if I wasn't clear enough. Yeah, 15 he was convicted of, and one count of forgery as well. Will forging. He committed his first murder at Pontefract General Infirmary, which he was never charged for. This, he was only charged for the ones he committed in the 90s. It was when a woman left her little girl, who was very ill of cancer, in Harold's care, and she said, look after her, take care of her, like a mother would do. Be gentle with her, be careful with her. And in Shipman's fucked up mind, he took that as her saying, like, kill her, end her suffering. So he gave her what her mother, in hindsight, feels, and what investigators felt in hindsight was a fatal overdose of morphine, which was how his mother was treated, and how he would view his mother being treated for her pains to do with lung cancer. She was given morphine treatment, and it's believed this is his first murder. I had music too loud in the background, so didn't hear you clearly. Sorry, it was me, not you. Oh, it's fine. Who you listening to? I've been really loving your the music you've been putting on for your pics on Insta. House of the Rising Sun and Stones and all the '60s stuff. I could just sit and listen to music from the '60s all day. I love that we share that together. It's such a great time for music and for fashion and for everything, film, everything. But I digress, as I always do. We do on this channel. We're ADHD, OCD, whatever the hell you want to call it. I don't put labels on myself too much, but yeah, certainly get on one tangent to another. But I think that can be good, because I often find that can uncover things that I sometimes forget about to do with the original thing I'm talking about. So it's all a game in the end. It's all a way of getting to the answers. And he would kill many other times as well during this time in Pontefract. And obviously he was never charged with any, but main scope of the deaths of his patients were, as he was convicted for in the 90s, elderly women who were widowed or spinsters, so no husband in the picture to ask too many questions about the death. And his first ever criminal conviction came in 1975, when he was caught forging prescriptions for the synthetic opioid pethidine, which he had been abusing for some time. That's his addictive personality coming through. He had that addiction to the runner's high, and this is the almost a chemical way of replicating that. Opioids get your endorphins firing. And it is very much like a runner's high, the high you get from opium based painkillers and heroin. That's why it's so addictive. The body is so naturally able to receive it, because we have these receptors in our own bodies. That's why we get highs from exercise, from running. Just reggae for Barry and Shiloh. They love it. Oh, that's so nice. I love reggae. So chill and soulful, and just good energy. It's good cleansing energy. I have some Jamaican rum flavored papers, rolling papers, which I'll be using later, and probably listen to some reggae myself, some Disco Devil. I love that song. It's a great song. Oh, hi, Amber. Glad you could make it. We're talking about Harold Shipman. Is that basically like Demerol? Very much like it. Very much like Demerol. It really it's strong stuff. Um, so yeah, he'd been abusing it for some time. He was in get this. He was injecting himself with 600 to 700 milligrams a day. So it's amazing that he was able to even function and do his job on that amount. That's the type of amount that you'd expect someone to just be sitting in their chair for most of the day with a cigarette in their mouth. That's not an amount that you'd expect someone to be moving and up and about on, but he was. Ultimately, though, when he was abusing it, an incident happened where he was driving his car whilst high on it, and he'd taken too much, and he crashed the car. He lost the ability to move his move his arms and his legs as strong opioid painkillers do, and he crashed the car. And then he made the excuse to Primrose that he had epilepsy and had a seizure whilst driving, and that was just not the case at all. And then from then on, he also used that excuse of having epilepsy, which he didn't have, to explain why he was, seemingly looking so doped up and high all the time. Yeah, seriously high tolerance. He had track marks all over his arms, his legs, even his feet. He was really bad in, and it's astounding that a guy of such a respectable background was getting away with this for so long. And then eventually, in 1976, he was caught forging prescriptions for the pethidine, not for the murdering, which he was doing as well as taking the drugs. And it's interesting, some people would say, would you think he was taking the drugs to deal with the guilt of the murder? No, I think he was taking the drugs to increase his high and his kick from the murders. I think Shipman had a deeply addictive personality, and I think it manifested itself in many ways, not just in drugs, in obviously murder and in sex. Although although his murders were not motivated by sex, he did not sexually interfere with any of his victims. So he was convicted of drug possession and prescription forgery and fined £600 UK currency, and had to attend a rehab in the city of York. But despite this, was not banned from practicing medicine and not struck off the medical register. However, would have to reveal this past conviction at any future job he was to take, which is astounding if you think about it. He then was removed from the Todmorden practice, which he had joined after leaving Pontefract, where he joined Todmorden as a general practitioner, not a houseman, so as an ordinary kind of doctor, so a promotion, so to speak. And he was removed from the Todmorden practice where he was discovered, forging prescriptions. And when he was removed, they did offer him the chance to resign, but he said, "You'll have to force me out," and he threw his doctor's bag in anger. And the other staff there said, when they were being interviewed for a book about Shipman that I'd read, had said that they'd never seen him even show any kind of emotion other than kind of just baseline shit. You know what I mean? They never saw him show any kind of anger, frustration, sadness, happiness. He was just a cold motherfucker until then, and he blew up. And Primrose as well came into the office after he stormed out and said, "You'll have to force him out. He's not going to go out willingly." So Primrose, it was very much Primrose and Harold against the world, because Primrose's family had rejected her because of her being pregnant out of wedlock, and also being with Harold, who they increasingly hated because of his drug possession conviction and all that. And them being devout Methodists, they really didn't like what he'd been convicted for. And but then, after he completed his rehab, in 1977, he was hired at Donnybrook Medical Centre in Hyde, Greater Manchester. So he and the family, he and his kids, and Primrose moved to Greater Manchester, Hyde, which is just outside the city of Manchester. So in American terms, it's like upstate or upstate Manchester, if you want to hear it in American terms. But yeah, Greater Manchester, Hyde, just outside the city. Quaint town, a lot of old people, very wealthy, not typical place of the Northwest. It's quite a well-off area. And he explained his past drug abuse as being motivated by stress, and said that after his treatment, it would not happen again. And and then in 1993, he set up his own medical practice in Hyde still, and this is where the murders that he was ultimately convicted for would take place. However, as I previously stated, of the 15 murders that he was convicted for, police and investigators believe that he committed over 250 murders in total, spanning from his start as a GP in and is also originally as a housemaster in houseman, sorry, in Pontefract, and then moving up to Todmorden in that period in the early to mid 70s, culminating in the late 1990s. So for 22, 23 years, he was killing, but he was caught out by what he did whilst at his own practice in Hyde. And this is what led to his arrest and convictions. And the start of his investigation. Hi, Christine, glad you could join us. And the start of his investigation into his murders started in March 1998. No, it didn't start in March. A preliminary investigation into him was triggered by the medical authorities in March 1998, because fellow doctors and funeral home owners raised concerns over the frequency of deaths of his patients in near identical circumstances. So basically, all these people knew Shipman had so many patients because he would always, they were always around him and signing death certificates and whatever, and being the funeral home, the morticians and things like that. So they noticed that Shipman's patients were dying more. Basically, Shipman had more dead patients at his one lone practice than he had than other practices that were not lone, that covered a lot larger an area, had in over a decade. So the numbers were just not adding up. His rate of dead patients was incredibly high, and him being in attendance either just before or just after they died was incredibly suspicious to his fellow doctors and funeral home owners as well, because like I said, they were putting his patients in the ground with much more frequency than any other doctor's patients in the Greater Manchester area, in Hyde, or in Manchester in general. It beggars belief. Hyde is not a very large place, but essentially his patients from 1993 to 1998 were dying at a rate of about one every 10 to 15 days over certain periods of time, which is phenomenal. So he committed a lot more murders than he was able to be charged with, because the police could have charged him and convicted him of many more, but they didn't feel it was necessary because of the overwhelming evidence against him on those 15, and they didn't want to have to put more families through the stress of a legal procedure when they were very confident in the case that they had against him. But yeah, and this was also noticed, the frequency of his dead patients by someone who was not in the medical field or funeral care field. Actually was a local taxi driver, a man who used to like my late uncle, actually was like a private taxi driver. He would take fares mainly from elderly women, take them to doctor's appointments, to bingos, to see their friends, to church, to whatever, hairdressers. And he'd develop a very close relationship with these women because he'd be, driving them around every day, weekly, whatever. And he noticed like a lot of his customers were patients of Harold Shipman. And he noticed a lot of them would die from seemingly being very healthy, very on their feet, very aware, very active. To the next day being dead, found dead at their homes. And he for years from 93 up until 1998 kept a record of all the names and the dates and what happened. And his wife was seriously concerned with him, saying, "Look, he's a very well respected doctor. You can't say anything about that to anyone because they'll have you in court for slander, or they'll think you're mentally ill or something." So, out of fear for his own reputation, he kept quiet about it until the police investigation became known, and then he brought them his findings. So that's an evidence of an amateur sleuth being able to give the cops uh, like a treasure trove of evidence, of records. So it shows you, that we can make a difference in cases. We don't have to have a badge to make a difference. Obviously, like with the Kylie Rodney case and so many other cases, um, lots and lots of other cases where people in the true crime community have helped with the investigation in some way or another. So, no matter, how big or small you think you are, you can make a difference. You just got to believe in yourself and do the right thing. And Shipman in March 1998 was investigated by the medical board, but they found no cause of concern, which of course they protect their own, which is really disturbing. That these funeral care people, a taxi driver, other doctors could see how these numbers for his patients, their victims as well, just didn't make sense. These women dressed not in their night clothes, in their day clothes, dying at home in the sofa, after having just seen him, is glaringly suspicious. And Shipman would dismiss these concerns as saying that he was just an old style doctor and would make his rounds unannounced to patients generally when he was in a particular area, like doctors would do back in the 1920s and the 30s in Britain. And most doctors don't do that anymore, But then ultimately, in June the 24th, 1998, his last victim, which would prove to be his undoing, was killed, which was Kathleen Grundy, who was the former Lady Mayoress. So she used to be the mayoress, the mayor of the town of Hyde. And she was a very well respected and very, very wealthy lady. And she was very, very fond and thought very, very highly of her doctor, Harold Shipman. And she was his last victim. And he was at her home when he administered a fatal morphine overdose to her. And this is where he got caught. Shipman was left £386,000 in Kathleen Grundy's will, written days prior to her death, typed up on a typewriter. And Grundy's daughter, a solicitor, a lawyer, suspected a forgery because her daughter was left with had already taken care of all of her mother's will previously and had not been made aware of any change of arrangement. And on the will itself, her mother's it didn't look like her mother's handwriting. It looked like someone attempting to forge it, and obviously the blame fell on Shipman because he was the beneficiary of it. And so initially he was investigated by the police, and they thought it was just a forged will, like Kathleen Grundy had died of natural causes, as Shipman said, but he had forged the will. So the initial investigation was into a charge of forgery, which he was ultimately convicted for, and they did pursue. But this opened up a can of worms, so to speak, and this triggered the initial criminal investigation into Shipman, and then this caused the taxi driver that I mentioned earlier to come forward to the police to tell them of his feelings, and others came forward to the police, and then the police exhumed Kathleen Grundy's body from the ground and performed tests on it, because in all these cases, Shipman was able to encourage the families, to accept the cause of death on the death certificate that he gave, and that was that. There was no need for an autopsy or for a coroner to go over it, because that wasn't generally standard practice in Britain, or as common as it is in America. And Shipman used this to his advantage. And obviously, he groomed his patients very well, because his patients would always speak very highly of him to their families, which is why, uh, Kathleen Grundy's daughter wasn't too shocked to hear that her mother had left him some money, but when she heard it was all of it, and she saw it, and she heard she hadn't been told, and it was clearly a forgery, that raised the alarm bells. But when Kathleen Grundy's body was exhumed, they found high levels of morphine in her system, which is what Shipman used to overdose her, and then that they suspected him of murder, because it's very unlikely that a woman in her 80s, a former lady mayoress, was abusing morphine. It's rather unlikely, as it goes. And this triggered an investigation. And Shipman did try to say that she was a drug addict, and said that she was abusing morphine, and that he'd been trying to get her off it, which is absurd. Rubbing salt in the wounds of his victims, and it was found that the typewriter that was used was his own, and his excuse was that he loaned it to Mrs. Grundy to type up the will. But that says a lot. He used morphine, I believe, because that's what was used to treat his mother when she was in pain from her lung cancer, back all them years prior. And he associated that with the release, and also with the feeling of opioids in general, which he was himself addicted to. He associated it with pleasure, and with the release of suffering, and he, maybe in his own bizarre way, he got a high from playing God, and also he tried to probably justify it to himself, saying, "Oh well, they're old. They all that would have happened to them was they would end up in an old folks' home, and they'd suffer. So I'm taking them before they get to that stage. So I'm actually being a good person, in a delusional sense." I think that was probably how he would justify it to himself, in a really warped way. Because he did think very, very highly of himself. And it was probably a huge boost to his ego that he felt like he was playing God, and he had all this control, because in his childhood, he had very little control. He was dominated by his mother, controlled by her in every way. And I think, despite him saying he loved her, I think there was a big part of him that resented her. And I think when he was ending the lives of these elderly women, he was pretending it was his mother. I think that's why, it all goes back to that. And on the names of his murder victims, and those of which he was officially charged with, because he had many, many more victims. He was only charged with 15, but police believe he killed over 250 people from the mid 70s to the late 90s. There's always a controlling mom. Oh, there certainly is. Or an absent mother, or oftentimes rooted in childhood. Did he just prey on the elderly? No, his first victim was a child, a very young child, which we were talking about before you got here, Christina, and I'll happily go over it again. His first victim, which investigators believe, which he wasn't charged with, they focused on only his crimes committed at his own practice in Hyde from 1993 to 1998. However, this first offence was committed in Pontefract in West Yorkshire in the early 70s. A little girl who was suffering from cancer, very sick, was left in his care by her mother, and she said, you know, as mothers do, you know, look after her, you know, just take care of her. And in his warped mind, he thought that means end her suffering. So he gave her an overdose of morphine, investigators believe. And that was part of the inquiry that was done after his death. So, and under his conviction. So, like, they, instead of charging him for all the murders he probably committed, you know, in the 70s and the 80s, they established an inquiry to give families of victims clarity and established like what he did, and that was one of the cases. So he did, but 80% of his victims were women and were elderly women. His youngest victim that he was convicted for was only 49, and he generally targeted elderly women because I think that they were easier to explain they died, and also he saw his mother in them, I feel, and that's what motivated him to do it, I think. And the names of his and the names and ages of the women who he was officially charged with killing. He did kill some men as well, but it was overwhelmingly women. Marie West, who was 81, Irene Turner, who was 67, Lizzie Adams, who was 77, Jean Liley, who was 59, Ivy Lomas, who was 63, Muriel Grimshaw, who was 76, Mary Quinn, who was 67, Kathleen Wagstaff, who was 81, Bianca Pomfret, who was 49, Nora Nuttall, who was 65, Paula Hillier, who was 68, Maureen Ward, 57, Winifred Mellor, 73, Joan Melia, sorry, 73, and Kathleen Grundy, his final victim, who was 81. And he was, you know, these were all women who deeply trusted him. And he was also charged with will forgery as well. And his trial took place from October the 5th, 1999 to January the 31st, 2000. So crossed into the new millennium. Shipman was tried, as I said, on 15 counts of murder and of one of forgery in Preston Crown Court. And Preston is another town not too far away from Manchester. And he was convicted on all charges. The jury deliberated for about 6 days. And no, not 6 days, 6 hours, sorry. Not 6 days. They came back pretty quick. And on January the 13th, 2004, Shipman hung himself at Wakefield Prison. He did this just before he was set to lose the rights to a medical pension, which Primrose, his wife, ultimately got. You know, his wife was able to get his medical pension, because if he'd have died a couple of days later, Primrose wouldn't have been entitled to a medical pension. He wouldn't have been entitled to a medical pension, you know, because of his crimes. You know, it was a long process to actually remove him from all the medical boards and privileges that he had, but that process has been changed significantly as a result of what happened afterwards, which was the Shipman inquiry, which I discussed earlier, which involved obviously giving clarity to victims that weren't covered in the 15 counts from 1993 to 1998, which happened prior to all that, and also to establish how we can never let this happen again in Britain, and understand how it was allowed to happen, and increase further scrutiny for GPs and for medical practitioners, and to allow patients to feel more able to scrutinize, and the families of patients to feel more able to scrutinize the actions of doctors. So it really did create a societal change, like the Moors murders, which I've discussed earlier, changed Britain in a way, and his crimes changed Britain in a way. And funnily enough, well, not really funnily enough, but ironically, uh, they Harold Shipman committed his crimes in Hyde, and the Moors murders lived in Hyde for a time in the 60s before Shipman got there, but still. Hyde's seen its fair share of murderers live there. And what's very nice in Hyde, if you go there now, they have a nice memorial garden dedicated to all the victims of Harold Shipman, and they've got really nice stones there, beautiful marble stones and benches and trees, and it's like a place for families of his victims, but just the public in general to just go and reflect on things. You know, it's a very, very beautiful place. I'd love to go. I've seen lots of pictures of it, and next time I'm in the general area back home, I'll make a trip and take some pictures for everybody. And obviously, I'm not going to ask around the town about him because it's still very sore in a lot of people's minds because of how many victims he had. You know, we've just gone through the list of just in Hyde alone. You know, many people are affected directly or indirectly by his crimes, and still very raw wounds right there. And he, whilst in prison, he actually saved the life of his cellmate, who was choking to death. He actually performed CPR and saved his life. The possible reason for him doing that was that his victim, or his victim, his cellmate, was not in his real victim category. He was a young man, and like I said, he was younger and he was a man. So Shipman, not always, but preferred to kill elderly women. That was his MO, and do it with morphine. You know, so he saved the life of his cellmate, which you know his cellmate described, and he Shipman befriended other killers in Wakefield. In fact, but also whilst he was on remand in oh fuck, what's the name of the prison in Manchester? It'll come Strange Ways. Yes, when he was on remand in Strange Ways, he funny name for a prison, isn't it? Strange Ways. He was on remand there, and he mixed with another serial killer uh, who I've looked into. His name escapes me at the moment, but he was a guy who actually grew up in the same town I grew up in. But the guy committed his serial killings in North Wales. He didn't kill in my hometown, but he grew up there and he was from there. But he mixed with Shipman in prison and befriended Shipman in strange ways. And apparently behind bars in strange ways and Wakefield before Shipman finally took his own life. Uh, uh, kind of like the name of the prison, Strange Ways. Yeah, yeah, it's be a good name for a band, wouldn't it? Like a punk band, Strange Ways. Yeah, yeah, or a goth band, you know. Surprised there hasn't been about, you know, Manchester's full of bands, you know, full of punk bands, goth bands, you know, rock bands, bands of any kind, you know. So I'm surprised none of them have called themselves Strange Ways. He may well have, but I've never heard of a band by that name. But I think it's a perfect name for a band. You know, you've really you've triggered something in me there, Christine. I'll if I do decide to form one called Strange Ways, I'll throw you a couple of bucks in the royalties department. Yeah, very good name for a punk band. Glad you agree. Yeah, and when Shipman was in prison and in jail before he took his own life, he was like still carrying on being a doctor unofficially to the other inmates. Like a lot of them would prefer him to and say he was a better doctor than the one that they had assigned to them in the prison. And obviously, because there's so many of them, that a lot of them would be waiting a long time to get advice, and Shipman would give them medical advice and like informally in his cell. And like he was like very, very popular amongst the inmates, and there was concern initially that someone like they may want to get at him, but he was in general population. Nobody threatened him. No one said any abuse to him. I think genuinely a lot of them believed that he wasn't a killer. Uh, because all these guys are like hardened criminals, and some of them would have killed and known killers in the Manchester. In strange ways, it ain't some fuck. It ain't like the prison that fucking Ghislaine Maxwell's in. It's not some laid back place. It's like Britain's Rikers Island. It's serious, serious, strange ways. Like hardcore criminals, hardcore gangsters, murderers, drug dealers, hitmen are in there. You know what I mean? And he was mixing with them. Real, killers in the sense that they, we're taking on other killers, and it's, and probably in most people's eyes, more morally upright killers, if there is such a thing. They're just scumbags killing scumbags. In a lot of people's eyes, it's not really, it's not in anywhere near the same thing that Shipman was doing, killing poor old ladies who trusted him and loved him and idolized him. And even little kids as well, and lots of people. 250. The guy was a massacre. A massacre. They didn't call him Doctor Death for a reason. Nobody in like Vietnam or a war like that got anywhere near that level of kills, and that was the aim. That was what they were there for. Nobody was getting in those numbers. You know what I mean? People that the most prolific in the Vietnam War was guys who were getting like at most like 20 odd kills. Okay, he killed 250 people. It's crazy and he did this not in some country where there's a lack of resources, governmental structure, oversight, police funding, whatever. Like in some really war-torn African country like Somalia or something like that, which just doesn't have like a functioning government or legal system. He didn't do it there, where you could imagine somebody with that intent could do that to such great numbers and get away with it. No, he did it in Britain. He did it in Britain in the mid to late 70s to the late 90s. It beggars belief at how he was able to do it. That's been the main thing that's always interested in me in this case, and I think I know how he was able to get away with it. In Britain, there is a culture, and it's only slightly getting away from this, of not questioning authority, because Britain is a monarchy, okay, and questioning authority isn't something that's encouraged in a monarchy. So yeah, you don't question authority. Doctors are authority. You don't question priests. You don't question politicians. You don't question royals. You don't question TV presenters. And all these people have been uncovered to be, all these types of people. It's been uncovered that predators were always lurking amongst them, and they used that, poor sense of national character of arse kissing everyone and never questioning authority and not having thoughts of your own, and being passive and subject to the wishes and the whims of the people with the power. All that national character, as they call it, is what enabled Shipman to get away with this for so long, as well as the fact that he had the trust of his victims, which is essential for any predator of any kind, is to have the trust of your victims and the trust of your victims' families. Because, like I said to you earlier, all of these old ladies worshipped him. He put on the charm, uh, like cranked it up real high with them, and they would tell their families how amazing he is. That's why he had so many patients. He had so many patients for his just his one GP, an astronomical amount. He was like the most popular doctor in the town with all the old ladies in a town that has a very large elderly population anyway. Um, but yeah, I think society has changed. I don't think someone could commit 250 murders and get away with it for 20 odd years in Britain anymore, unless they were in the government or, a real, strong position of power like the monarch or something like that. Uh, but as a doctor, no. And it's a shame, though, that it seems like with Harold Shipman, with Jimmy Savile, there's so many other cases where, it takes like a tragedy or a massacre or awful tragedies for legislation or reforms in the system to actually take place. I wish the system was clean and healthy enough to make these reforms without being forced to, essentially, by situations like Shipman's killing campaign and the abuse campaign of Jimmy Savile, who we will discuss in a future live. But I'm thank you for everyone for sticking with us, and we're coming to the end now, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about Harold and Primrose. Uh, I believe that Primrose knew he was killing. I believe that she knew full well he was killing, because, as well as forging Kathleen Grundy's will, when the police raided Shipman's house, they found a bunch of jewelry, and it belonged to all of his victims. After he injected them with a fatal dose of morphine, he'd go pilfering in their cupboards, steal the jewelry, and he'd steal like petty change and a couple of pounds from the pension books, things like that. Real cheap shit. And he'd take all this jewelry home and he'd give it to Primrose, and they were saving it. They had it in hoards. And I think that they were gonna pawn it and sell it and move abroad. And I think that that's why he forged Kathleen Grundy's will, was because they wanted money to get out of the country, to retire in the sun, and not have to face the families of the people that he'd murdered. But she was never charged with being an accessory, but I feel strongly that she knew what he was doing. His kids, on the other hand, I think that they were totally in the dark. There's a picture of his youngest son in tears coming out of court when his dad was convicted. Because I think up until that point, his kids, thought the world of him, and didn't believe it. But I think his wife Primrose knew full well what her husband was like. And Shipman, I talked briefly that he was addicted to sex as well. And during his time working as a GP in Todmorden and in Pontefract, he would journey into Leeds and other parts of Yorkshire to use sex workers. And actually, this was during the time of the Yorkshire Ripper murders. So Shipman was questioned in relation to the Yorkshire Ripper killings. He's a man, he's a murderer who was a famous murderer, who was questioned about the murders of another famous murderer. And I don't know how often that happens, but it's a real crossover of a case that we only discussed a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, it's different. It's unique, and shows you what a small place Britain is, really. And yeah, like, I want to remember all the victims, because I think people don't remember him as much, Harold Shipman, and his crimes, because his victims were mainly elderly ladies. And I think people think, oh, they were elderly, they didn't have much time left anyway. But you don't know that. These women could have lived till there are hundreds and hundreds and tens, and it's not Shipman's or anybody's job to say when somebody's time's up. It's nature's job. It's the God's job, as I believe. You know, it's not for him to say, or for, you know, it's not his right. You know what I mean? It's disgusting. I think, and I was surprised actually that he'd never tried to say, look, actually, these are cases. These women loved me, and I loved them, and they wanted to go out before they declined and before they had to go into a home, and this was essentially assisted suicide. I'm surprised he never said that. But he was caught. I'll get quickly how he was caught out officially in the forging of the will, because he had used his own typewriter and his own handwriting. However, also for the records of his patients, after he'd killed all of these women, he would go onto his own computer and he would edit their medical records, and say that they had ailments and illnesses that they didn't have, that they'd never reported, they'd never shown signs of to their families, to their friends, to anyone. And he thought that that meant he was in the clear. And he was very confident and was very talking down to the police officers interviewing him in his police interview. I'll put a clip of that on my community page afterwards for Val and Christine and Amber and anyone who wants to check it out. And I'll also be linking the TV movie that was made about him and his crimes. Really, really well acted. James Boland, really good British theatre actor mainly, and also TV and movies. Starring as Shipman. Really, really well done. Looks just like him. And yeah, he thought he was so much above the police in his knowledge of computers, because he was the first GP surgery to medical practitioner to completely digitize in the northwest of England. You know, he thought he was so much smarter than the police. Goes back to his sense of superiority instilled in him from his mother. And but what he didn't account for is that the police had their own computer experts, as you know, you would imagine, and their computer expert was able to see that Shipman had performed edits, and when these edits were performed, and it was after these women had already died. So that's what sealed his conviction. It was probably the first big murder case in the UK, high profile one, that was sealed by computer based evidence. And yeah, it really is said. And I absolutely agree. I think he did think he was God. I think that sense of superiority, that sense of I'm better than my peers, that was instilled in him from his mother when she wouldn't allow him to play with any of the kids in his housing projects that he grew up in, because she always had ambitions that he'd be a social climber, you know. And then, you know, he was talking down to the police. He, you know, always saw himself as a cut above people. And I think when he was taking those lives of those poor women who looked to him with nothing but adulation, trust, and care, he felt like God. And he was just a pathetic, weak man. And yeah, I'm glad he took himself out and wasn't lingering around, and isn't really, you know, I think it's important to discuss his case, but I'm glad that he's not widely known, because I think he would have liked that. But it's important to discuss how people like him can blend into society. Like, look at the pictures of him, you know, he doesn't look like a mass man. He doesn't look like a guy who could kill 250 people. If someone could look that way. No, but no, he does. He looked like a, you know, like a granddad, like a local doctor. He, you know, he seemed really friendly, and he was loved by everybody in Hyde. He was hero worshipped. And just dead quickly before I say goodbye to you all, I'll link this on my community page as well, because this is very interesting. There's a like a TV kind of chat show, call-in show in the UK called The Right Stuff, and it's and this was an episode back in the 2000s, and the theme was like, have you ever been deceived by a person in trust? And a woman called in explaining how she had worked as the secretary with Harold Shipman when he was the leader of a Boy Scouts troop. So he was the leader of the troop, and she said she described how he'd said to her, like a day before it had all come public about his charges of murder and everything. He was like, "Oh, I don't think I'm going to do it next year." The Boy Scouts, and she was like, "Oh, why?" So, "Oh, I've got a bit of bother with my with one of my patients. It's an allegation. It's nothing. These things can sometimes happen." And she thought that he'd been accused of maybe being a bit inappropriate with one of his female patients, but then the next day when she looked on the TV and saw that he'd been charged with 15 counts of murder, and that the police suspected him of many, many more, she was just horrified that, a man that she liked, she trusted, she saw, being amazing with kids, and we talked about Ed Gein last time. He was great with kids, you know what I mean? And it was hard for people to accept Ed Gein had done what he did, and it was even harder for the people of Hyde to accept that Shipman had done what he'd done, because he was so loved by them, and he felt like that. And I think he felt a massive high of being worshipped by these people, but also knowing, I know something you don't know. I'm God. I'm the Grim Reaper, and you're all too stupid to figure it out. So it makes you wonder, maybe he wanted to be caught, but I don't think so. I think he got overconfident and assumed that he would be able to get through with that will forgery, but that was ultimately his undoing, greed and his own ego. But thank you very much, everyone, for joining us for this. It's been really uh, enjoyable to share, like, my research with you, my difficult case to discuss, as they always are on my channel. But it's important to see, like, how people in positions of trust have to always be scrutinized. What with Epstein stuff coming out and all that, I think now more than ever we really need to uh, put the people who are in power, in authority in our world, in our lives, under a magnascope, and not be afraid to challenge them when we feel there's not something right going on, or that they're not doing something right, and know that we're all equal, that we all have an equal voice in the world, and someone's job, someone's money doesn't mean that their voice is any more important than yours. That's just perception. We need to get rid of that false perception. There's no superiority. We're all equal in our abilities to have our own voices. So yeah, thank you very much, Christine, Val, and Amber, and everybody else who checked it out live, and Diva Girl, and everyone who's checking it out on the replay. Hope you enjoyed it, and in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Goodbye.